welcome back.
Thank you, Larry.
And congratulations on the overall Journalist of the Year.
Thank you.
And the reason why you're here is important. You're an investigative reporter. You have reported extensively on security. And one of your stories brought us here in terms of unattended bags and how people should react to that. And while you hold that thought, Dennis Nthumbi is back with us, security analyst. The reason why these gentlemen are here today, in Mombasa earlier today, we saw an incident where the unattended bag was left somewhere in the city and people just crowded around it. So even after your story, Dennis, people have not learned anything.
We're actually discussing it with Dennis here, and I was telling him it's interesting that after all these attacks, people still know that an unattended bag could be dangerous. Yes. But still people mill around the bag. The police, forgetting the people, the way the police were handling this particular bag was also something that is very questionable, because it's not very professional to do that, to open your bag with bare hands and checking what's inside with your hands. It's never done like that. And even after your story and your feature, which was a television event, everybody saw this. You took this bag around at Central Police Station, at the Jomo Kenyatta International Airport. You'd think the message would have gone across. It's interesting Larry mentioned that, because when I did the story, a couple of the tweets that I went through at the time, and this was the reality. People started telling me, people will forget your story as soon as they've just talked about it. And that's a fact. It goes to tell, no matter how much you talk about this issue, no matter how many times you'll do the story, and we do the story, Kenyans have the habit, and it's a culture that really has been in us for a very long time. And how to break it, I have no idea how to go around it, but we've been there, we are still there, and unfortunately, we will still be there. So, Dennis, this other Dennis, tell me, what should you do if something like this were to occur? Because this will happen all around the country for one reason or the other. Correct. Larry, this all boils down to lack of public awareness. In basically what in security terms we call it harsh environment awareness training. I think the key thing is that the state and the media must sensitize the public. Like we're doing right now. Like you're doing right now, which is congratulations. I mean, in terms of that. Thank you, yes. There couple of number of scenarios in terms of what it is that we're looking at terrorism. There's what it is that we call the active shooter scenario, what it is you saw at Westgate. There's a vehicle-borne improvised device, basically what we call VBIDs. There's person-borne, you know, wearing of the vest. There's all sorts of scenarios that we look at. The key thing is that you immediately have to take cover. And even before taking cover, you have to raise an alarm so that you can warn the rest of the people. The natural, the natural effect for a human being is basically to come up with a curiosity. Because you're curious, so you want to move closer and see. But that curiosity will kill you, just like it did to the cats. Yes. The thing is this: you have to safeguard your life first. Number one is that you need to make sure that you have taken cover. If at all the bag is suspicious, it must be handled as the actual item. Yes. You cannot handle a suspicious bag with suspicion. Yes. You have to handle it with actuality. Okay. You have to make sure that you're not a professional yourself, and then you have to move away from it. At least we call it buffer zones. You know, 100 meters to 200 meters, depending on the threat itself. All right. Yeah. Stay with me, gentlemen. I want to take a short break. We'll be back to talk about a lot more of what you should do in situations like this, but also the current security situation in the country. Are we prepared enough and whatnot? Right after this break. Popular view. That's true, Larry, and I remember, I honestly don't think this is a Somalia conversation, but we still can't ignore it. But why do you say it's not a Somalia conversation yet? Everybody who looks at this in the wider picture says, we were warned when we went into Somalia that there will be retaliatory attacks, and these are some of the things we see. I think, Larry, the question is, are we the only ones who are in Somalia? We're not. Correct. So this is not a Somalia conversation. The question is, by the end of the day, who is it that is bombing us? All the attacks that have happened, Al-Shabaab haven't come back and said, we claim these attacks. The question is, who is bombing us? So we need to ascertain who is this enemy, from within or from without. Then at least we can go and tackle the issues. There's Kenya also is in the sphere of homegrown extremism. Yes. Who exactly? And you see, one of the objectives is basically to discredit the governments of the day, or also to cause economic sabotage. So we need to ask ourselves hard questions and get the answers. We can't just have, you know, an off-the-shelf conversation and say, pull our troops out of Somalia. As a government, we also have an obligation
why are we discussing issues of Sudan also?
Yes.
Because we have a regional obligation and we have a human obligation. We can't let our brothers in Somalia suffer, and also we can't let our people in Kenya suffer. The issue is really who is the enemy, and who can claim, you know, in regards to the attacks that have happened lately.
Dennis, you're an investigative reporter. You have a lot of sources and security in other places. And maybe one aspect, somebody just sent me a text message who says here, responsible journalism. He says the over-coverage of the bomb attacks is exactly what the attackers want. And to see, because once we create this level of panic, then they have achieved what they wanted.
And that's correct. That's what they want to do. They want to put us in a state of panic and a state of sabotage, like Dennis mentioned, economically. But there are two things here. One, we failed in the years, in the past, to realize that if our neighboring country, whether it's Somalia, whether it's South Sudan, whether it's Uganda, Tanzania, Burundi, whichever country, once there's instability in those countries, they directly or indirectly affect us. It may be short-term or long-term. And one of the things that has happened is we've been dealing with these situations as they happen. So we are more reactive than proactive. And what we never did, we never foresaw a faceless enemy called terrorism.
Yes.
And we never made plans and on how to deal with this faceless enemy, because right now, the way these terror attacks are being carried, many years ago, you'd have someone strap themselves with a bullet.
Yes.
I mean, with a
bomb or an
explosive vest, jacket. And today, they're putting IEDs that can be assembled through a manual over Google, and they can do this, put in a bag, and leave it just exposed somewhere. It has changed. So this is a question of strategy. Did we think of what would happen 5 years to come?
Yes.
Right now, we're actually dealing with grenades and IEDs. In the next 2 or 3 or 5 years, we could be dealing with something else. Israel, a country that I love reading about, that has also gone through these issues, started by having suicide bombers. Then it went to missiles.
Yes.
Now, Israel has actually taken security as first priority. That is first in everything that they do.
So
and
the game is changing.
The game has changed. And now they're not dealing it with a show-to-tell idea. They're actually on the front line to make sure that professionals are handling this, and there's no nonsense approach.
Hold that thought, Dennis, because I want to remind all our viewers back to Terrorist Playground, which was his seminal piece of work, which he did about a month or so ago, or maybe slightly longer, and some of the lessons we learned from that.
Bother to check us when we got into the bus whether what we're carrying in the bag.
Yes.
And that's actually still at Kencom. We left that bag unattended for I think 3 hours there. And people were jumping over the bag, standing next to the bag.
Yes.
No one took notice. And here's the thing, and I mentioned this earlier, that the approach in Israel is very different, that even a class 6 child is trained and taught, treat everybody as a suspect, and then prove them innocent later. That's the thing, and that's not what you're doing, because and Larry, this is what happens. If you hear of an explosion like what we've had today and what we had yesterday, the first thing you'll do, if you know someone who lives around the area, you'll call them up.
And I did call, relatives I know.
Find out, are you okay? Is so-and-so okay, so-and-so okay? Once you find out that they're okay, then it doesn't affect me. So it just becomes another story on TV, another story in the newspaper the following day, another story in radio. So as long as it does not affect you, you don't think twice about your surrounding. But talk to Westgate victims, talk to those who are affected, those who had their loved ones killed, or those ones who are still being cancelled. And they will tell you they're very cautious everywhere they're going. They notice if your pocket is bulging, they notice
there's something unusual about it.
Yeah, they take caution. So the idea here is, let's all be very cautious with bags, with anything that looks suspicious.
Okay. What is the role, Mr. Nthumbi, of intelligence in this, in trying to forestall some of these attacks? Because I'm sure there must have been some intelligence chatter to say, okay, there's likely to be something happening along Thika Road, look out for these kinds of characters.
The role of intelligence comes, is put together when you're talking about security strategies.
Yes.
And if you're looking about strategies to combat terrorism, then intelligence falls in one of them.
Okay.
I mean, for me, I basically talk about a fourfold, security strategy.
Real quick.
Where, you're basically looking at various things, and I'd refer to it. You're looking...
Nyumba Kumi the solution, Dennis?
It's part of the solution.
Part of the solution.
Part of the solution. I think what it is that we need to do, we need to come with multi-strategies, basically, to combat this. There is no one way of combating terrorism, believe me. There's no unproven way, but there are several ways. The reason is because, as my brother said over here, it's, you know, you have to look at the forecast. And it emerges. Today they'll hit you this way, tomorrow they'll hit you this way. Okay. So you have to be ahead of them in terms of the game. You have to ensure that you have closed your borders. You know, you have to ensure that your immigration system is proper. You have to ensure that you know basically who lives within Kenya. Okay. Because that's the question, is do we know or not?
Dennis, we don't usually know. We live in such unusual situation in this country where you don't even know your next door neighbor. And therefore, it's a mess, isn't it?
Again, I go back to culture.
Yes.
It's culture. And I think looking at it holistically is just having two dimensions into this. Having a human dimension and also depend on sophisticated weaponry technology. Because here we tend to think of what do the intelligence know that there was going to be an attack. Mm-hmm. Then again, you can't have police officers everywhere at the same time. We may have layers of security given places like malls and shops and hotels and all these places. But a bus stop, it's very, very difficult to have multiple layers of security, very difficult. So again, it goes down to you and me. Okay. Apart from the Nyumba Kumi, where you just know your next door neighbor, where you're standing at the bus stop, are you noticing anything around you? And it's very
anything
interesting.
Suspicious? Yeah.
And it's interesting because I had a chat with an Air Force guy just the other day, and he was telling me, he was walking around Nairobi. The fact that he's a Muzungu, he got into different shops, got into malls, no one checked him. And where I was seated with him, he actually had a gun and he had a penknife.
And nobody had checked,
nobody checked him. And he told me, in Nairobi, it's very interesting. Just because I'm Muzungu, you imagine I can't be a terrorist. Terrorism has no face as we speak. It has no nationality, it has no religion, it has no face. So we're dealing with a faceless enemy who can strike at any time, anywhere.
One aspect of this, Dennis, finally, real quick, is the chiefs are being put on the spot. You have to register everyone in your locality, or you face the sack, as it were. That's being very strong-armed, but will that work?
Momentarily it will. Momentarily it will, because, I mean, registering people really is, again, part of the solution, because you're registering me as who. The question is, you have to be able to...
I just need to know your business. Where are you from? What do you do? Where do you work? What's your phone number?
You know, security is about a belly scope approach.
And what is that?
Belly scope, basically looking at the underlying issues. I could be an astute businessman. You know, I could have a good job, but